Three mature men publicly ridiculed a mother who was struggling, and no one spoke out until an MMA fighter in a hoodie decided that silence was not an option. Traven Miles was unwilling to be observed that afternoon by anyone, including fans and trainers. After 5 consecutive days of sparring sessions and media duress, he was exhausted both mentally and physically. His coach consistently reminded him, "One incorrect action, Trey, and it's back to regional cards." UFC recruiters had been conducting reconnaissance. He drove across town, keeping his head down and his hoodie up, to a location where no one knew his name, save Moore, located on Fremont Street in Stockton, California. He did not attend to a full cart, rather, he purchased eggs, oatmeal, almond milk, and a few muscle recovery beverages. There is nothing noteworthy. He made minimal eye contact with the cashier upon entering the establishment. His earbuds were not even playing music, he wore them solely to prevent others from initiating conversation. He merely desired a peaceful departure. The location was nearly deserted, which was to his liking. 2 teenage males were engaged in a heated argument over frozen pizza, a few older individuals were perusing the produce, and a baby was crying in the distance. Traven stalked the perimeter with his head lowered and his gym bag draped over one shoulder, resembling a specter. His pace did not diminish until he approached the self-checkout area. There was a sound that was not merely cacophony, it was tone. Sarcasm, which is tinged with cruelty, is boisterous enough to attract attention but falls just short of being classified as harassment. The volume is just high enough to induce a sense of isolation in the victim. A toddler was perched on her hip as a woman in her mid to late 20s stood at the counter, wearing a gray hoodie with a bleach mark on the sleeve and sporting a brown ponytail. She was attempting to scan a carton of cereal and a pack of diapers. Her young son, who was approximately 2 or 3 years old, was wide-eyed and had his head reclining on her shoulder. 3 mature males were seated behind her, and they were laughing. In March, one of them with a thick build, buzz cut, and cargo shorts held up a can of beans and flung it into his cart as if he were playing a game. "Look, I'm also doing it. Hey, lady, do you think they'll give me extra stamps if I wink at the cashier?" Another individual intervened, feigning offense. "Give her a break, brother. She is merely instructing her child on the importance of early morning hustles. Show respect for the grind." They all started laughing. The cashier's eyes shifted to them, but she refrained from speaking. The remainder of the store maintained an air of indifference. Traven ceased his walking as he approached the end of the chilled food aisle, just past the energy drinks. He tilted his head slightly, allowing him to observe the entire scene from the side. The mother refrained from responding with an angry scream. She was not defending herself. She maintained a low profile, rummaging through her wallet and murmuring to her son, possibly in an effort to maintain his composure. Her hands were trembling. Traven had been reared by a woman who was similar to her, a woman who was never able to defend herself in public. A woman who sacrificed her dignity on numerous occasions in order to ensure that her children were adequately nourished and that the lights were illuminated. While standing there, he was torn between 2 instincts, either retrieve the item he had brought and depart discreetly, or speak up. He gazed downward at his calloused digits and his damp hoodie, which had been subjected to training. This was not a ring. There was no crowd, no ref, and no mitts. But the line had already been crossed. The third man directed a booming kissing sound toward the mother with his mouth. "Hello, my dear, please swipe that card twice, once for the child and once for me." Through his nasal passage, Traven exhaled. He made a left turn. He walked with quiet, deliberate steps toward the scene, allowing his bag to fall to the floor behind a refrigerated receptacle. He was not anticipated by anyone, at least not at the time. However, something was amiss. The mother did not even react as he turned the corner near the frozen section. You could tell that this was not the first time, not today, perhaps not even this week. She moved with the grace of an individual who had acquired the ability to remain diminutive in the presence of excessive noise. She again reached for her debit card with trembling fingers, her son still clinging to her neck, his eyes wide and bewildered. Traven halted a few feet behind the group of men, close enough to hear everything and close enough that they should have noticed him. However, they have not yet done so. Poking at a loaf of bread, the individual with the buzz cut leaned closer to the mother's trolley. "Observe the abundance of organic products, it appears that the government has acquired a sense of taste." Traven spoke only 2 sentences at that moment. "Remain composed. Low. Managed. Back up." The men turned slowly, anticipating the presence of a timid consumer or an elderly man. They were not prepared for Traven Miles. He stood with his arms relaxed, one hand still in the pocket of his windbreaker, and his eyes fixed on the individual in front. "I am not incensed. I am also not beaming." He was present in that manner that indicated that he had no intention of departing. The individual who was wearing cargo shorts raised his eyebrows. "Are you conversing with us?" I said. "Back up," Traven reiterated. "Allow her to settle the bill in silence." For the first time, the mother glanced up, taken aback. She blinking, as if uncertain as to whether she was expected to speak or remain mute. She received a scoffing chuckle from the man who was closest to her. "Remember your obligations, sir." Traven made a single stride forward, remaining composed and silent. "I am currently engaged in the business of observing three men behave in a manner reminiscent of high school punks while assisting a mother in purchasing food for her child. Consequently, this is my current business." Suddenly, no one moved. The third individual, who had made the kissing noise, hesitantly shifted and glanced at the registers. "He is merely exercising his muscles. Come on." However, Cargo Shorts refused to concede. He was unable to do so due to his vanity. He stood up and slightly inflated his chest. "Look, man, I have no idea who you believe you are, but a gym rat in sweats is not a threat to anyone." Traven did not flinch. "I am not present to frighten you, rather, I am present to prevent you." The store had become unusually silent. During the scanning process, the elderly couple at the checkout halted. The candy aisle was the scene of the adolescent boys' frozen argument over pizza, which they were observing as if it were a pay-per-view event. One of them even produced his smartphone. The individual in cargo shorts briefly examined his phone before returning his attention to Traven. That was the moment when it all came together. He was being monitored. The pressure has since changed. He was adamant about not appearing vulnerable, whether in person or online. So, he proceeded with the customary behavior of individuals of his caliber when they are humiliated. He intensified the situation. Traven was violently propelled by him. It was unclean. It was not even well-timed, it was merely a stiff, angry thrust to the chest that was intended to convey the message, "Back off." However, Traven refrained from proceeding. He did not misstep. He assimilated it, as if it were a blow that was significantly more severe. He did not speak for a brief period, instead, he gazed at the man's hands, as if he were contemplating his next move. Then, Traven's hand rose, not to strike, but to seize the individual's wrist, twist, and immobilize his arm. A second later, he executed a clean, effortless shoulder turn that caused the man to fall to one knee, causing him to grunt in pain. However, he was not severely injured. Traven approached him and spoke softly, but loudly enough to be audible. "I could conclude this in 3 seconds, however, I am not present for that." He relinquished his grip and retreated. "All three of you must depart." The other two were no longer courageous. They seized their companion by the shoulders and began to drag him away, muttering curses under their breath. The telephones were still operational. The murmurs had evolved into a full-blown commentary. Traven did not appear to be concerned. The mother was unable to move, as she continued to hold her infant. Traven approached her, adjusted his tone, and addressed her, "Are you feeling well?" She slowly nodded, her eyes welling up with tears that refused to subside. Her son concealed his visage within her neck. Traven further stated, "You are not required to express gratitude. Finish your payment and return home safely." However, a much more potent force was about to break the silence. At this point, at least 5 phones were recording. It was possible to detect faint murmurs emanating from consumers as they recounted the recent events, as if they were viewing a live stream. One individual whispered, "He folded him like laundry," while another repeatedly stated, "I have the entire thing. I have the entire thing." However, Traven was not observing the throng. His gaze was still fixed on the mother, Alyssa, as he would soon discover, and the young boy was pressing against her shoulder. She was uncertain about whether to complete the checkout process or to abandon all possessions and depart immediately. Her hands dangled unnaturally in the vicinity of the card reader, frozen in the state of awe that occurs when adrenaline and disbelief intersect. There was eventually a response from the cashier. "It's all right, mother. You are free to proceed. No one will interfere with you at this time." Alyssa gazed around, as if she were poised to be reprimanded for having continued. Next, she scanned her EBT card almost mechanically. The approval signal was more pronounced than usual. Traven observed her attempt to balance her son while gathering the supplies. The child had his arms around her neck in a manner that suggested he was unwilling to relinquish control. She attempted to grasp a paper bag, but her grip faltered. One of the cereal cases toppled to the ground, causing her to wince. Traven stepped forward, knelt down, and began to retrieve the pieces without uttering a word. He did so in a manner that was both effortless and unforced, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. One of the elderly women in the vicinity gently gasped, not in response to the cleanup, but rather in response to a subsequent statement. "You are not required to provide an explanation for your survival." Alyssa gazed downward at him, her eyes red-rimmed and glassy. He reiterated, "You do not," as he stood and handed her the satchel. "I observed the manner in which you appeared when they conversed with you. It appeared as though you were about to elaborate on the reason you required assistance. You are not required to explain this to anyone." A genuine pause occurred, allowing the chamber to receive its weight. Subsequently, she gently responded, "It is difficult when they treat you as if you are stealing for attempting to provide your child with food." Traven nodded once. "They are irrelevant, as they are unaware of your existence." Eventually, the child peered over his mother's shoulder and observed him, his thumb still in his mouth, and his large, brown eyes. Traven offered him a modest smile. "Does he have a name?" She modified her grip. "Yes, Malachi." Traven gazed at the young child. "He is fortunate to have you, Alyssa." She glanced. "The question is, how do you know my name?" He cocked his head in the direction of the card reader screen. "It appeared during the checkout process." A smile was scarcely discernible. "Well, you possess exceptional vision." Near the end of the aisle, a few individuals began to applaud. That was something Traven despised, not because he did not value support, but because it elicited a sense of spectacle. This was not one of them. He turned slightly toward them and extended his hand, not in an aggressive manner, but just enough to convey that this was not an occasion for acclaim. "Is it possible for someone to assist her to the vehicle?" he inquired. "She is preoccupied." A tall woman in scrubs moved forward without hesitation. "I acquired her." Alyssa gazed at Traven once more, but this time with a distinct expression, not gratitude or embarrassment, but rather a subdued acknowledgement. "You are not what I anticipated." He elevated his eyebrow. "What did you anticipate?" "I am unsure. I am not a person who fights back without throwing punches." He nearly burst into laughter. "You would be astounded by the appearance of combat outside of the cage." Malachi pulled on her sleeve. She gazed downward and nodded. "Yes, baby. We are returning home." She turned to depart, with the nurse following in her wake. She carried her son in one arm and provisions in the other. The cereal carton in Traven's hand was partially crushed, and he stood still. A person standing behind him inquired, "Yo, what is your name?" He has yet to respond. However, the occasion was already more significant than his name. Traven refrained from retrieving his trolley. He did not even attempt to retrieve the protein drinks he had intended to purchase. He proceeded to the conclusion of the checkout line and remained standing by the wall, observing Alyssa exit through the automatic doors with the nurse trailing behind her. The manager was already on his radio, contacting security to inquire whether the police needed to be contacted. The response was affirmative. A report is submitted whenever there is a physical altercation, regardless of whether it is resolved in a matter of seconds. Traven refrained from engaging in a debate. He sat on a bench near the exit, his hoodie still up, his forearms resting on his knees. He retrieved his phone and gazed at it, as if it were preparing to provide him with instructions. Pop-up notifications were emitting. A brief video of the assault had been posted by an individual, and it was rapidly disseminated. He was indifferent. Few minutes later, a corpulent officer arrived. He glanced around, feeling slightly breathless, and directed his attention to Traven. "You were the individual who halted the altercation?" Traven stood with his hands visible, not because it was mandatory, but because it simplified the situation. "Indeed, sir. I am the individual." The officer was taken aback by his composure, and he blinks. "Are you experiencing discomfort?" "I did not inflict any harm on him, rather, I maintained control over him." The manager intervened from behind. "We have captured the entire event on camera, and there are numerous cell phone videos. He did not engage in any unnecessary activities." The officer briefly observed Traven's visage before inputting a message into a small notepad. "May I examine your identification?" Traven delivered it. The officer examined it and performed a brief mental gymnastics. "You're that fighter, Traven Miles. I have observed you on television." Traven offered a half smile. "Occasionally, I comprehend that." The officer returned the ID, stating, "You have saved that woman from an unsightly situation. We will file a report to ensure that it is documented, but you are not in any trouble." Traven concurred. "I am grateful." One of the store attendants approached the officer as he departed, still holding a phone. "You really said that to her? About not explaining survival?" Traven raised his head. "Yeah. She wept when you expressed it." "I deduced." The clerk briefly gazed at him, as if he intended to elaborate, before nodding and departing. The phrase "you don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving" was already circulating. People were quoting it, reposting the footage, and adding their own stories to it. Narratives about mothers, fathers, veterans, and children, anyone who has ever been made to feel inferior for requiring assistance. However, Traven refrained from engaging in conversation with the camera. No follow-up was submitted. Refrained from attempting to capitalize on the situation. Indeed, that was not the reason for his intervention. 30 minutes later, he exited the store. The parking lot had become increasingly sparse. The air was silent and cooler. Now, there was no crowd, only a handful of vehicles were passing by, unaware of the events that had transpired inside. A rust-colored sedan approached the corner of the parking lot. Malachi was asleep in Alyssa's arms, while she occupied the passenger seat. The nurse was operating a vehicle. She waved as she rolled down the window. Traven approached. Alyssa gazed at him and stated, "He has finally fallen asleep." Traven grinned. "It appears tranquil. He consistently does so after he weeps, it's as though he releases his emotions." She hesitated before expressing, "I did not anticipate that anyone would offer assistance." He responded, "You should not be required to anticipate it, however, I comprehend the situation." She acknowledged, her voice scarcely above a whisper, "I felt small. I felt as though I was not welcome in that environment." "You belonged in there more than they did," she exhaled, as if she had been retaining her breath for days. "I am uncertain as to whether individuals such as yourself comprehend the implications of intervening in that manner." He shook his head. "I did not engage in any extraordinary behavior, I simply did not pretend to be unaware of your presence." She nodded once more, but this time without weeping, she simply expressed comprehension. She then stated, "I am available if you ever require a conversation. Although I am not particularly accomplished, I am capable of preparing an exceptional peach cobbler." Traven laughed. "That is alluring." After a brief period, the attendant announced, "It is time to depart." Alyssa waved, and the window was raised. Traven stood with his hands in his windbreaker pocket as the vehicle exited the parking lot. However, he was unaware of the fact that the narrative was only just commencing. Inside Save More, the echoes of the incident continued to reverberate. Despite the fact that the majority of the crowd had dispersed, employees remained in clusters, ostensibly stocking shelving. However, they were actually conversing about the individual who had flipped a bully as if it were nothing. The video was now being circulated on local news and Facebook pages, with each post becoming slightly more sloppy than the previous one. Traven was not fond of headlines, but he was compelled to acknowledge that events were progressing rapidly. He acquired his gym bag from its location near the refrigerated section, secured it with a zipper, and slung it over his shoulder. He briefly considered returning to retrieve the recovery beverages, however, the sensation was peculiar, as if any ordinary beverage would have undermined the gravity of the situation. Rather, he exited through the side entrance, which was located near the cargo dock and was unoccupied by anyone with a phone. As he passed a few workers who were taking a smoke break, his eyes were wide open. Traven responded with a single inclination when one of them presented a brief wave. That was sufficient. He sat in his vehicle for a period of time with the engine turned off, his phone facing downwards on the passenger seat. Absence of music. There are no notifications. The only sound was the gentle murmur of traffic passing by a few streets away. He gazed through the windshield and reflected on a statement made by his instructor to him following a victory months prior. The most challenging aspect of strength is determining when to employ it and when to remain seated. Until recently, Traven had never truly comprehended that statement. The silence was eventually interrupted by a buzz from his phone. He disregarded it. Then, another one followed, and another. This time, a telephone call. He examined the screen. "Coach Briggs." He responded, "Are you sure?" Briggs inquired, "How are you?" Without greeting her. "I am in good health. Your name has already been published on TMZ. Would you prefer that I manipulate the situation or allow it to unfold naturally?" Traven exhaled. "Allow it to exhale. I anticipated that. However, you must be prepared for the media. You have saved a life, Trey. That is a significant accomplishment. I did not engage in the activity for the purpose of obtaining media coverage. I am aware. That is why it is significant." After a brief period of silence, Briggs inquired, "Are you returning to the gym?" "Not tonight. I will contact you tomorrow. I am proud of you, young man." Traven terminated the conversation. He initiated the engine but failed to transfer the vehicle into drive. Rather, he reflected on Alyssa, The way her voice broke when she expressed her feelings of insignificance. And how often had he observed his own mother maintain her composure in the face of whispers and judgment from those in her vicinity, all in an effort to avoid attracting someone's attention. Additionally, Malachi, the child would recall this day. Not the altercation. Fear is not the issue. However, the manner in which an individual advocated for his mother without anticipating any reciprocation. That mattered more than any octagon victory ever could. Traven eventually arrived at a tranquil area near Victory Park and parked beneath a tall sycamore tree. He exited the vehicle, proceeded down a path, and sat down on a bench by the water. Earbuds are not permitted. Absence of sensors. Silence. A woman who was pushing a stroller passed by, gave him a cautious gaze, and then smiled upon recognizing him. She tenderly stated, "You are the individual from the store." Traven nodded, uncertain about what to say. She continued to walk, smiling once more and expressing her gratitude for serving as an example of compassion. He did not respond, rather, he observed her as she vanished down the path. However, the genuine narrative had not yet been published online. That section was yet to be completed. Traven's phone was nearly unusable by the following morning, with a battery that had been depleted before sunrise, a voicemail that was overflowing, and messages that had accumulated to the triple digits. A video of the entire encounter, from beginning to end, had been posted by an individual in high resolution. There will be no extravagant modifications. Absence of dramatic melody. Unprocessed footage. Traven, who stood up to the three men and disarmed the tension with calm and control, and that now famous line, "You are not required to provide an explanation for your survival." The recording was widely disseminated on Reddit and Instagram. Even the news that is broadcast during the day. He had already been tagged by a few local influencers, and his social media accounts, which had previously been primarily used for gym clips and fight promotions, were now inundated with followers requesting interviews, podcasts, and brand agreements. However, Traven was not reacting to any of it. He was once again at the gym, preparing for a sparring session by wrapping his wrists. The same routine, the same perspiration, and the same scars. Coach Briggs entered the room with a tablet in hand. He stated, "They are interested in having you appear on Good Morning America." Traven did not even raise his head. "I stated that I will not be participating in the press. This is not the press, it is an entire nation that is eager to hear from you." Traven stood up after completing the strapping of his wrist. He brushed past Briggs and dropped the tablet onto the bench, saying, "Then let the video talk. I understand. However, this is distinct. You did not merely emerge victorious, you provided individuals with a source of motivation." Traven paused, gazing at his instructor. "Do you recall the time when I was 15 and was assaulted outside of Ridgeview High?" Briggs concurred. "I recall. You did not deliver a punch, you endured a beating, but you never struck. I had the option to fight, but I was aware that if I did, I would be the only one arrested. They would accuse me of being violent and dangerous." Briggs replied quietly, "Yes. You informed me of that in the emergency room." Traven resumed his position on the sideline. "The same rule remains in effect. I only engage in combat when it is necessary." Following that, the coach refrained from engaging in any further arguments. Alyssa had eventually viewed the video in another location. Her initial reaction was to delete it, as an acquaintance had sent it to her without any prior notification. She was averse to reliving the humiliation, however, her curiosity prevailed. She observed the instant the cereal carton collided with the ground. Observed Traven kneel in order to provide assistance. Heard her own voice crackle on camera. Upon hearing the statement he made, that particular line, her hand immediately reached for her mouth. People had been recording, and she had not even realized it. An overwhelming number of comments were submitted, "Ensure the safety of this individual at all costs." She did not request assistance, he opted to provide it. "It is the right of every child to witness men of this caliber in real life." He reminded her that she owed no one anything. Although Alyssa lacked a significant following and a platform, she possessed a memorable narrative. 2 evenings later, after putting Malachi to bed, she commenced typing in her notes app. She wrote about how she had not always required assistance. About her employment termination during the second round of layoffs at a transportation company. Regarding the decision to accept part-time positions at a laundromat that provided a salary that was nearly sufficient to cover rent. Regarding the embarrassment of displaying a benefits card in public. Regarding her son's inquiry as to whether individuals harbored animosity toward him due to their poverty. She then wrote about Traven, noting that he refrained from lecturing the abusers or making a spectacle. She stood motionless, as if a wall were separating her from the individuals who were attempting to undermine her. She concluded the post with a phrase that would be cited nearly as frequently as his: "Some individuals deliver punches, while others maintain their composure to allow the rest of us to breathe." Within hours, it gained widespread attention. Additionally, local news channels began to publish her narrative, not the sensationalized version, but the one she disclosed. The individual who is human. The focus gradually shifted. This was not a case in which an MMA fighter felled an opponent. This was about the concept of standing in the breach when the world turns its back. Traven did not respond to the post, however, he did read it. Twice. However, the most significant occasion had yet to transpire. It would not necessitate either a throng or cameras to capture it. A week has elapsed. The din did not completely diminish, however, it did become more subdued. The hashtags experienced a deceleration. The media requests transitioned to more recent topics. The world continued to evolve, as it always does. However, Traven refrained from doing so. He was not initially seeking attention. His daily routine resumed its previous pattern: early mornings, sparring exercises, and solo runs through the streets of Stockton prior to the onset of traffic. He had experienced numerous significant moments in the cage, but none had clung to his chest in the same manner as this one. He entered the parking lot of a modest community center located off Charterway on a Friday afternoon. He was not scheduled to deliver any speeches or instruct anyone, rather, he was simply delivering some delicately used gloves and shoes. Items that could be beneficial to the younger combatants. He did not require credit. He was simply eager to depart. However, as he approached the front desk, a voice that was well known to him captivated his attention. "Traven?" He pivoted. Near the entrance to the playroom, Alyssa stood with a binder under one arm and Malachi by her side, holding a juice carton. She smiled, as if they had collided at a coffee shop, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He reciprocated with a smile. "I was not anticipating your presence here. I assist with the intake of a parenting class on Fridays. The environment is somewhat chaotic, but the rewards are juice boxes and crayons." Traven's trouser leg was tugged by Malachi as she advanced. "You provided assistance to my mother." Traven gazed downward. "Yes, I suppose I did." The child nodded once, his expression solemn, as if he were accepting a medal. He then resumed imbibing his juice. Alyssa chuckled. "He has been practicing that for a week. He stated that he wanted to inform you directly." "Well," Traven said, crouching down. "He performed admirably." She briefly examined the luggage that was in his possession. "Removing items?" "Yes. I have an abundance of equipment that I will never utilize. I assume that someone else might require it." "That is your specialty, is it? Doing so quietly?" Traven shook his head. "Excessive volume is not always beneficial," she agreed. "I have been contemplating your statement regarding the obligation to provide an explanation to anyone. I have never heard anyone say that before. It is unheard of." He gazed into her eyes. "I intended it. I am aware. I am now convinced. It took me a moment, but I am now." A pause occurred. It was not awkward, but rather silent. "At ease." Subsequently, she stated, "I have been composing more posts of late, which are primarily about my life as a mother. They have been well received." "You are a talented writer," he stated. "The most recent one you shared was particularly impactful." Her irises were illuminated. "Have you reviewed it?" "Yeah." "You did not like or comment?" "I do not engage in all of that, however, I do read it." She smiled more broadly and then gazed downward at Malachi, who was currently pursuing a dust bunny in the vicinity of the baseboard. "You know," she said softly, "I used to be so ashamed to arrive at places like this. I always felt like I had to explain how I arrived. However, now, I simply walk in without a story or an apology." Traven concurred. "That is genuine strength." She briefly observed him. "Is that the lesson you are imparting to the children you train?" He contemplated for a brief period. "The discipline, the mindset, is what transforms individuals. Fighting is merely the surface." They maintained silence for a brief period. Alyssa then extracted a folded sheet of paper from her binder. "I composed this for Malachi. It functions as a promise and a letter. I wish to convey to him that survival is a privilege, not a burden." Traven received it from her. "You are free to keep it, you reminded me." He removed the paper, examined it, and then delicately folded it before placing it in his jacket pocket. Malachi yanked on his mother's sleeve. "Are we on our way home?" "Yes, we are." Traven observed them, not as a viral moment, but as a family that was navigating their future. In that instant, Even in the absence of a camera, phone, or applause, he felt a profound sensation. Not a triumph. Harmony. If this narrative resonated with you, please consider subscribing, as genuine fortitude occasionally does not originate from victory. It is the result of rising up, quietly and firmly, when someone is in need.